And you promise you're not mad at me, right?
I promise I'm not mad at you. Are you mad at me?
Never. Never.
Okay.
I'm not mad.
Okay.
I don't have the energy
Okay.
to be mad. Like ever.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maddie.
And I'm Abigail, and this is
Two writers.
Many Wrongs. Two writers, many panels. Today, we're super excited because we're doing our recap of AWP. For those of you who have been listening, Maddie and I just got back from the largest writers' conference in the nation, and we had a lot of fun. It was in LA this year, which was a little bit scary, but I personally would give it probably like a 4 out of 5 stars. What about you?
The LA or the conference in
No, the
LA?
conference. LA is like a 1 out of 5 star for me.
Yeah, those are very different ratings. Yeah, I would say this
Yes.
was a really good one. I would say probably 4 out of 5.
Hmm.
Um, I think it was really good. I really liked the conference center we were at.
Yeah, it was really nice. Well, and the only thing I have to compare it to is Seattle 2 years ago. And Seattle was a 5 out of 5 for me, but I think it's just because of where I was in my life and the fact that it was my first AWP. Um, but I feel like this conference center was easier to navigate.
Yes.
Um, and it was super close to our hotel, which was awesome.
Yeah, I think I liked the how easy it was to navigate because I felt like both in Seattle and in Kansas City, I felt like both times I was sprinting back and forth between
Hmm.
the sessions. Like I barely had time to get to my next session because they were so far away. Or I felt
Wow.
like I don't know, maybe they grouped them better, or it just wasn't as
Hmm.
spread out or more like you could more quickly get to different parts of the conference. I don't know what it was, but I definitely felt like it was easy
Yeah.
to navigate.
Well, in Seattle, I feel like there were 3 levels. So you would have to take the escalator up and then take it back up again and then go all the way back down. And like it was a lot of back and forth.
I feel like there were
Whereas
more
this
than three
one,
levels.
I mean, probably, but for me personally, the rooms that I was in, I think I only had to go between the three. But for this one, honestly, I was pretty much in the same like 4 or 5 rooms every time, which was nice because I know that there were like back hallways for more niche things. Um, but the panels that I was there for, were all kind of centered around the same thing, and so they were all kind of in the same place.
That may have more to do with it too, because this time I was more selective in the things that I chose. I wanted to focus on a specific thing instead of spreading myself too thin and going to a bunch of different things. So maybe that has more to
Hmm.
do with it.
Yeah. So that's kind of the first thing that I want to talk about is the thing about AWP that I think is really cool is they have panels for every genre of writer, every like writer's identification and like cultural background. They also have different panels for every like stage of writing. So I really feel like no matter where you are in your writing career or where you come from, you could go and find a full schedule of activities that you could relate to and benefit from. So I was really torn between do I want to go for teaching and pedagogy, or do I want to go for publishing, or do I want to go for craft? And so I really focused on publishing, agenting, and then I did go to, I think, maybe 2 craft talks, but I didn't do anything for teaching this time. I really decided to like prioritize myself and my ambitions. And I found it really beneficial. What did you choose to prioritize this time?
I think I went a similar route where I chose predominantly publishing and agenting, but the craft talks I went to, I focused specifically on editing. I really wanted to deep dive into editing and learn some new best practices for it.
Hmm.
And I did a couple of sessions on short stories because I still really love short stories. And I saw them on the list of things you could go to. And I'm like, I really love short stories. I want to go learn about them again and kind of refresh that love. And it was really good being around people that really love and respect the form. So that too.
That's so nice. Well, so I was going to ask, how well attended were those sessions?
They were definitely smaller. The short story one that I most vividly remember, if I went to two, I feel like,
Hmm.
but the one I most vividly remember when he had to, they start each panel with they read. something that's prepared by AWP, and they talk about like this the room, and there's like a line about if the room is starting to get too full, make sure you move up so that people have room to sit. And the guy who is doing the moderator for the short story one
Mm.
looked up, and he was like laughing, trying to finish that line, and he was like,
Oh.
if it gets too full, move up. And I really felt that, but I think it was a pretty good turnout. I feel like it was, you know how they had like the two sections of chairs, like
Hmm.
there was one full section and then there was like a
Yep.
break and then another full section of chairs. It would be like a full section of
Yeah.
chairs. So I felt like that was a pretty good turnout.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm trying to think. So I went to one panel that was about like parenthood and writing, and I think it was still relatively well attended, but I think that was maybe the least
Mhm.
full room that I was in. But pretty much every other panel about agenting and publishing and editing and all the rest of it, I mean, they were jam-packed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's everybody wants to write a novel. So I think that was, and not only
Hmm.
write it, but they want to sell it. They want to make money off of it. So I think that's what a lot of people go to AWP
Exactly.
for. So it doesn't surprise me. Those rooms are always packed and get to be like standing room only.
If you want to talk about highlights and lowlights, what was maybe your favorite panel or maybe two favorites? And then what was the worst panel that you went to? And I want to be careful when we say worst because it's not that the people giving the panel didn't put effort into it and didn't like do their best. It's just that I didn't get a lot of information out of it or that maybe you just didn't vibe with what they were saying or whatever. I'm not trying to put anybody down.
Yeah, totally. I think the best one I went to was honestly one that was on editing. I really enjoyed that
Hmm.
one a lot because it really gave me some insight and got me excited to edit again. And it's hard to get excited about editing sometimes. So there's a lot of like dry humor in it, and it was just I had a lot of fun in that, and I'm like a lot of really good tips about editing, and to a point that I think that maybe later in the episode we can talk about specific things we learned.
Hmm.
Then I would also say that up there would be the short story one I went to. It really like refreshed my cup for short story love because there's a lot of people that really love writing short stories and love reading them. So that was kind of a
Hmm.
nice uh, recap for me. And as a low light, I don't know, you'll probably talk about this one too, but
Hmm.
it was one with debut authors that was
Hmm.
supposedly none of them were debut authors, but it was supposed to be about debuting your book. And a lot of these people seem to be in situations that uh, were very lucky, and they weren't
Yes.
practical steps of how to become a debut novel. It was like how lucky they were to become debut novelists. And I realized that there is a lot of luck involved in that, but there's also practical
Yeah.
steps you can take. And I would have liked to have heard from somebody who, you know, was rejected a lot and
Hmm.
had to work really hard and had to redraft their book or something. But it was all very like, oh, my dad was in an editor and he introduced me to an agent and they just wanted a book and hadn't even written one. And like, that's just not,
Or it was a lot of like, oh, well, my friend's agent, blah, 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 had a friend who was it. And it's like, well, my friends are in the same place that I am. They're also not published. So, okay. Um, and the thing that I found so frustrating about it is that in Seattle, I got so much out of that panel because they always do the debut authors panel. And when it was in Seattle, there was one person who got that lucky story, who was like the second agent I sent it to liked it, the third publisher we sent it to published it, like whatever. And then there was somebody who was like, yeah, I've been doing this for 5 years before an agent picked me up and whatever else. And then there was one person who was like, I didn't have an agent. I went through a contest and I won. I don't know if it was a tin house or whatever, but she won some kind of contest and then got an agent after the fact. And then there was somebody else who was like, I didn't do an agent. I did a small publisher. And so that panel was so good 2 years ago. And this one, basically all of them were like, oh yeah, I had a friend who, or they were like, oh, well, I've already had two short story collections published, but this is my first novel. Or, oh, well, I already have a career as a children's book author, but this is my first adult novel. And all of them already had a history of publishing.
mhm. Yeah.
So I agree with you. That was a hard one.
And
Um,
it was one thing to say like you had a history of publishing in the
mhm,
past and then you debut your novel because they weren't talking about like, oh, in
right.
order to get to this point, I did all these things and then I became a debut
Yep.
novelist. So it's like, well, since I was already
Hmm.
published, I knew some agents, I had them in my email
Yep.
contacts and I just emailed them to see if they were interested. And
Yep.
that's not
Yep.
particularly helpful.
Well, I also think it's really important to note that you are not exaggerating. There is no hyperbole in that one of the people legitimately said, "Oh yeah, I submitted an excerpt to a novel that I hadn't written yet, and that got published. And based off of that, I had agents and publishers reaching out to me asking for the novel, but I hadn't written it yet. So I told them, oh, well, I haven't written it. And they said, I don't care. We want it." And it's like, what the fuck?
That's
That's not helpful to anybody. That's not helpful information.
It's not. It's really
Yeah.
not. And I think
Yeah.
had this been my first AWP, I would have found that panel particularly very discouraging.
Hmm.
And I just wanted some practical advice because,
Yep.
and I'm so glad that we do this podcast and we've had the honor of speaking to a bunch of different authors here to know
Hmm.
that that is weird, that those are
Yeah.
exceptions to the rule, and that most authors do get a lot of rejections. Most authors maybe don't get their first book published. Most authors start off in a different
Yep.
genre. And, there's
Yep.
all these things that, there's so many different stories to be told, and it felt like a very limited scope of what a debut novelist looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't blame the authors. Their story is their story. They
Right.
can't make it up. I mean, they can, but I don't think they are. I blame the person who put together the panel this year. And it's frustrating because it's the same person that always runs the panel. And it's just one of those things of like, you know, I know that you have the ability to pick better debut novelists, and this was just kind of disappointing. Um, Switching to my highs and lows, I'm going to do my low first since we're already in that area. But there was another one that we talked about that we went to together called the Middle March, and it was all about getting through the middle of your novel. And it, I couldn't focus on anything they were saying. I don't remember any like notes that I took from it really. I think each person maybe they did like a reading or something, but like it wasn't helpful, unfortunately. Um, and I thought that it would be, about maybe like finding inspiration or finding, overcoming writer's block or how to plot a novel or something about getting through the middle of the book. And it just kind of was like a wine fest, it seemed like.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't remember very much about it, but I do remember them spending a lot of time reading off of like a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I just like they would talk about like, oh, I've always struggled with middles. Anyway, here's the middle of my novel, and then they'd sit down, and there wasn't any
Hmm.
kind of like action item. There wasn't really
Yeah.
notes to take. It was just like
Hmm.
anecdotal.
Yes, very anecdotal. Well, and it's funny because I remember you leaned over to me and you go, "What the hell are you taking notes on?" And I had like pieced together possible insights that like I inferred from their stories. But I have four notes for that entire hour-long panel.
Yeah, I think too, it depends a lot on your learning style. And like for me,
Yes. Hmm.
that's not how I learn. Being taught
Yeah.
at like
Yeah.
pointing out something, like reading an excerpt and being like, you see this paragraph right here. I really struggled with it.
Hmm.
Here's what it looked like. That would have been more helpful to me. Or like
Yeah.
just like even just saying like little pieces, snippets of advice that
Hmm.
like here's an anecdote about me writing my novel, and here is some some pointers that I learned along the way that can help in your writing.
Exactly.
But, I
Yep.
think that there's so many different types of panels that you'll find something that fits your vibe.
Yeah. Well, so that's what I was gonna say. So going to my highlights, I there were a lot of panels that I really, really enjoyed. And one of them was my editing panel. So the funny thing is, you and I went to two different editing panels, but they were at the exact same time. So we were texting each other during the two different styles of editing panels. And I really, really liked mine because while it was anecdotal, each person had like two or three pieces of solid advice. And
Hmm.
so, like, one person was writing a nonfiction book, and she's like, there wasn't really a plot. It was more about like thoughts and vibes and those kind of things. So she's like, so I took a highlighter for each of my different topics and highlighted the entire book based off of those five topics. And she's like, and that helped me to read. I could read the entire purple topic all the way through and see where I repeated myself and where. And thinking about how I could apply that to my novel was really helpful because even though she's coming from a nonfiction place, even though her book didn't necessarily have a plot, the tool that she gave me is still very useful. And each of the authors had something like that.
Hmm.
So I feel like you can do anecdotal well, but you have to remember people are there to learn. Like there were so many people that we talked with that were there either with their MFA program or they were similar to us who had left an MFA or left even a BFA and were looking for community and looking for that like educational support system that you miss from school.
Yeah.
And so I really like the panels that are there to help guide you and to help teach you.
Yeah.
Um,
So they had an exit survey. Did you end up
yeah,
taking it?
I did. Yeah.
One of my biggest critiques I did in my exit survey is I said that I would prefer if they would um, put people on the panel, prioritize people on panels who are teachers, who are
Yeah.
professors of some level or have experience in teaching, because there's a lot of panelists
Hmm.
that I feel like they may just be there because they got really big books. But
Yep.
just because you're a good writer doesn't necessarily mean you're a good teacher.
Hmm.
And I think I would rather learn from somebody who knows how to communicate in a helpful and
Hmm.
a proven track record of being able to educate.
Nice. See, and I put something similar-ish, except I put that I wish that they would vet their panels better and have somebody there to ensure that they are talking about like instructional feedback kind of thing. Which is a little bit hard because switching to my other highlight was the agent panel. And I went to two different agenting panels, and I'm trying to find my notes to remember what the titles of each of them was. One of them was Understanding the Manuscript Wish List, which it was a good panel, but it was much more about what an agent is looking for versus how to get an agent. So the one that I found really helpful was called Leaving the Writing Cave: When, Why, and How to Pursue Representation.
Mhm.
And there were five young agents. Um, and the way that they spoke with us, it really felt very, very clear of like every single agency is different, every single publishing house is different, but this is how we operate. I'm not saying that that's black and white. I'm not saying that that's the hard and fast rule, but here are some tips and tricks to hopefully catch an agent's attention. And so I think that's the panel that I took the most notes on probably.
Mhm.
Like I think I took like 4 or 5 pages of notes from that panel. And that was also the panel that one of the agents has already rejected me and or passed on my story. I'm trying to reframe that rejection
Yes.
thought. Um, one agent already passed on my manuscript, and another agent is the very first agent who has ever requested more pages. And so she still hasn't responded. She has the first 50 pages, so like fingers crossed. But being able to go up to them after the panel and talk to each of them was really like surreal, but also very helpful to remind myself that agents are just people.
Mhm.
And they're people my age who, yes, are far more professional than I am and like established in their careers. Um, but they're just people. And I think one of the most helpful things that they said was at the very, very end, and they said, we want to like your book. Like, we are not going through trying to write off whatever. Like, we want each and every manuscript that we read to be the one,
Mhm.
and sometimes they're just not the right fit. And like that doesn't mean that your book is bad. It doesn't mean that, you should stop trying. It just means that we are not the right person for you. And
Mhm.
that was really helpful to hear.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful message for them to end on. I felt like
Hmm.
Because sometimes you go to panels like that and they can be kind of like, I don't know, like a little, what's the word I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
for?
High and mighty.
Yes. And they're like, well,
Yeah.
but I think the meta has changed a lot for authors because I've been noticing, I mean, for agents, I feel like a lot of the younger agents who've been coming up are trying to be more open and more inclusive and more empathetic to their
Mm-hmm.
clients. And it's less trying to get away from that cutthroat industry
Yeah.
that it's always been and trying to be empathetic. Like, yes,
Yeah.
we know that this can feel cutthroat, but it's not anything
Mhm.
personal.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, I think that it's, one of the common themes that we ran into around AWP and that we've run into when interviewing authors is without Twitter, where is our writing community? And so many of these agents talked about the loss of Twitter, and they were like, you can still find me on X, but it's not the same uh, level of personability. They're not as active there. But the fact that agents used to do the pit wars or, these different like Twitter competitions to get pitches, um, really brought them I was almost going to say brought them down to the writer's level, but you know what I mean? Like, kind of put everybody on the same plane, which was
Mhm.
nice. And without that, I feel like they're almost retreating back up to that pedestal. So it was nice to see these agents, like, they don't want that. They want to be down with us talking about books and being excited for manuscripts. And they're not looking to be up on a mountain, you know, hand picking who they think is most worthy.
Yeah, the gatekeepers,
Right.
as they've been called, but they're really,
Yeah.
they're it's about a partnership, really. And
Mhm.
they're there to support
And
us.
frankly, if anybody's a gatekeeper, it's the frickin' publishers. Like, the publishers are the ones who have made it, so you have to have an agent to talk to them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking back to when we talked to Taylor and how
Hmm.
they really liked her book. It's just the market, it wasn't
Yeah.
marketable. And I think the market is the gatekeeper
Hmm.
that the publisher is deciding. Is like, oh, this hasn't sold, but they're not willing to take chances. And so a lot of stuff that has been like super popular in the past wouldn't have made it wouldn't make it through the gate today because it's not in vogue, but it may be the next big thing.
Well, and it even shows because Taylor was like, okay, great, thanks. I took your notes. I'm going to go self-publish this. And it freaking sold.
Yeah.
So it really is the publishers are the ones deciding the trends, but then blaming the trends, when they can't publish something. So it was just really nice to see those agents talking about really the whole process of agenting and publishing. And then that combined with the manuscript wish list panel,
Yeah.
where they kind of went through like, how do you decide who to send your book to? And the agent that I actually that passed on my manuscript, when I went up to talk to them, I basically said, thank you for emailing me back. Because so many agents just say, oh, if you don't hear back from me in 6 weeks, it's an automatic no. And you just don't hear anything and you never know. Did they read it? Did they not read it? Whatever. And this particular agent, went out of their way to email me, which was so nice. And when I went up to talk to them to say thank you for letting me know, I said, I didn't think that you were going to pick my manuscript, if I'm being honest. I sent it to you because your manuscript wish list, everything that you listed was something that I love. And like, I think we just have really similar tastes. So I
Mhm.
tried it. And the manuscript wish list panel, they said it's okay to do that as long as you know that like it might not be a good fit. Like you can certainly do that just because you think you would vibe with somebody. Because they were like sometimes we do pick that out of left field
Yeah.
manuscript. And it was very much like a, pick and choose your battles, but also if you see something like really far off, but you just want to give it a try, go for it.
Yeah, I think too, like one of the pieces of advice they said is, but like make sure there is like, something there that is
Yes. Yes.
reminiscent. Like don't just go like out completely out left field. Be like, it's
Right.
this little thing or this
Hmm.
particular vibe is totally my book, even if
Yeah.
not everything hits it. At least this one does.
Yeah. Are there any other panels that you want to highlight?
No, not that I can remember off the top of my head, but I would
Mhm.
like to kind of talk, maybe do a little bit more of a deep dive of like specific like points of advice or notes that you have that you really want to share?
Yeah. Um, Before we do that, can we talk briefly about the panel that we proposed to AWP? Because going through the panels that we attended
Mhm.
and talking to the people that we talked to and whatever else, I really, really like, I know this is dumb to say. I really think that people could have benefited from our panel. So we proposed a like how to build a community panel, and I really I want to keep sending that to them and keep trying because I think that that is still a huge aspect of something that's missing amongst writers is, a couple of the people that I talked to said, "Oh, well, I go to AWP because it's the only time that I talk to other writers."
Mm.
Um, and I think that looking at the panels, there wasn't a moment where I thought, "Oh, well, no wonder they didn't pick us." Instead, it was I really think we could have had something here.
I definitely had moments of I know it. Oh, I get why they didn't pick us, and I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it's because we're nobody. Like we're not known.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't have a book yet
Hmm.
that's published. I mean, you have some short stories that are published, but I think
But
it's just
yeah.
we're relatively unknown. So
Hmm.
I think we need to have some star power behind us in order to get picked, unfortunately. And I think that's just like people don't necessarily might not go to a panel
Hmm.
unless they're like, oh, I see, I know this author,
Right.
but like literally most of those panels, I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking is that they all are established in some way, but I don't know who they are. And I do agree with you. I think that, obviously, uh, in the same way of getting published, it helps if you have that following to kind of back you up. Um, but the content of the panel that we proposed, I definitely want to propose it again, next year or the year after and keep trying because looking at the people around us, I think that that could have been a really helpful panel. And I didn't see anything like that in the program, like any other, niche that that would have fit.
No, I because I didn't really see a lot of stuff about actively building a community that
Hmm.
you can take back home. And
Yep.
I think too, for those of you who follow NaNoWriMo, you'll know that they are
Hmm.
closing their doors. And I know
Yep.
that's a really big community for writers. And so now there's less and less ways for people to connect
Yep.
digitally. And
Yeah.
so it would have been good to have something to fall back on.
Yep, exactly. So I think that's something that I want to definitely promote again next AWP, and we'll keep promoting it here on the podcast, obviously. But I just think that community is such an important part of it, and I'm not even talking about networking. Like we tried to a lot of networking this AWP, which was exhausting. Um, but I am hoping that that will lead to a larger community. I think that'd be really cool. But we can dig into pieces of advice that we got if you want to do that. I might need a second to look through my notes if that's
That's
okay.
totally fine. I have my
Okay.
notes up. So,
Okay.
um, so practical pieces of advice I got at AWP that I really liked. Because I was kind of thinking this could be, when we talk to authors, we always ask them what piece of advice would you want to leave the audience with. So I want to think of this as that kind of thing. So I liked in my revisions talk that I went to that she had this thing that she said to define the question you're trying to answer and discard anything else. So like when you're looking at a chapter or you're looking at your story, define like what is the purpose of your story? What is it doing? And then anything else that's not facilitating that to throw it out. And I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
a really interesting way of, because like I've heard that before of like trying to find what your story is actually trying to answer and what it's trying to do, what's the important
Mm-hmm.
thing. But the discard everything else, I think was really important because I think a lot of us try to hold on to a lot of stuff, but actually look and saying, is this relevant? Does this pertain to the question?
Yeah.
I also liked she had this metaphor, and I love, we love metaphors here. Um, and she said, when you're writing a novel, you have to think of the Wizard of Oz.
Hmm.
In the Wizard of Oz, each character wants and needs something, a heart, a brain, courage, and your novel needs that too. in order to find a home for your novel, you have to make sure it has empathy, like heart. It has to have
Hmm.
brains, has to be it has to be intelligent, and you have to have the courage to be vulnerable. So I think that was a really cool way of like make sure your book has these
Yeah.
elements, but also like the imagery of the Wizard of Oz. And
Yeah.
there is no place like home, and finding a home requires you to
That's really
show up again. Yeah,
cute.
I know. But that was really cute.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. Okay, do you care if we just do like a back and forth thing as I
yeah,
go
go
through my
ahead.
notes?
Go ahead.
Okay. So in one of my panels that was birthing books and babies, that was the parenting one. Um, I liked the idea. It said put things in a sandbox, so write whenever you can, because I'm very guilty of I need to be sitting at my computer and know that I have time and work on my novel and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And this person was like, yeah, as your kids get older, it becomes harder and harder to like dedicate that time because, yes, it's obviously difficult when they're a newborn and a toddler, but then you start having, soccer practice and friends over for dinner and sleepovers and homework and all that. And she's like, there is never a hey, kid, go sit in a box away from me so that I can focus on this kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I like the idea of put things in a sandbox, whether it's a notebook or a file on your phone or whatever, and just write whenever you can. I thought was really nice because so often we get told, set aside that time every morning or every evening or blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was really nice. And then another piece of advice from that panel was you need to learn how to suffer better. You're never going to be completely happy or completely satisfied either with your book or with your children. And so you need to find a way to suffer better and appreciate the good things because neither of them are ever going to be exactly the way that you want.
Mm, it's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So I thought that was really nice because, as a writer, we often just accept, like, I'm never going to be happy with a draft. But I kind of like the idea as well with your kids, because I think especially with her being so young, there's still that idea of, oh, Maggie's gonna love me forever and be exactly, well, what I hope she is, and blah, blah. But like kids don't do that. Kids don't follow your rules. They're their own person. They have their own lives. And so you need to learn to be happy when you can and then suffer better through the rest.
Suffer better. That's so funny.
Yeah. I know, I really liked it. Okay, back to you.
I wasn't gonna bring this up, but I thought it'd be funny to bring up because it says one of the advices I got from that revision was to have someone to text through your panic attacks of like, of your writing and like when you're
I
like
got you.
stressed about your editing. And I was like, I was like, that's a community.
Hmm.
That's Abigail. Like if I'm having a really bad
Yep.
time with the writing or getting rejected,
Yeah,
you need to have somebody text through the panic attacks. So I thought I'd note
that's
that
so
one.
cute.
But another good thing I was in
Yeah.
this editing seminar was there's make sure that there's something that carries you from one scene to the next, like a baton pass, and it can be an object or a theme
Mm,
or a person, but there needs to be something that passes on to the next scene. So I thought that was a good way of
hmm.
visualizing to make sure that these scenes aren't just they have to have purpose, they have to feel like they're flowing together. And then the last thing that I got from this
Yeah.
was if it's easy to get rid of it, you don't need it.
Yeah. That's really good.
And so that's a really hard piece of advice. So when you're looking at your story, and if you can cut it and it's the same story, it doesn't need to be there at all. And that can be really hard. I
Yeah.
think that goes right along with that saying of killing your darlings.
Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
have to think about what's facilitating your story and whether or not you don't want to
Yep.
have extra baggage there.
Yeah. Definitely. Um, so one of the panels I went to was irresistible openings. And it was hard because some of it was kind of common sense. But I really like this idea that said the ending should be a profound reimagining of the beginning. And the author was talking about that they are like, I always know how my book ends. I don't know how it begins. And so
Wild.
I thought that was really right. I know. But I thought that was really nice that she talks about like they need to be in conversation with one another at the beginning and the end. And I think that I struggle so much with endings that actually this panel on writing openings helped me think about the endings of things because of that conversation that they were having. And then they also said an opening needs to establish tension without establishing plot or character, etc. Um, so they talk about like the killing should happen first or building to a revelation. Like you have to get the reader hooked without it being an info dump. And I
Hmm.
know that I'm guilty of that because I want to like establish everything as quickly as possible. And all your opening has to do is establish tension.
Yeah.
Like that's all it's responsible for. And that was really helpful advice for me.
Yeah, I also went to that seminar and I liked um they said begin the novel as close to the heart of the novel as possible, which I think
Yeah.
goes exactly to what you're saying. Like you don't have to start it like the day that it begins. Start it as it's beginning and you don't have to build up too much. You can build it as you're moving along.
Yep.
But I also liked there's another thing they said in there about your whole novel should be contained in the first page.
Yeah.
Thought that was really good. And I think that has a lot to
Hmm.
do with, we've talked about it before, I think, about like the implicit promise. When you start a book, you're kind of making a contract with the author. And in the first page, you should know what kind of story you're going to be told. And you have to
Yep.
uphold that in some way or another, whether that's meeting expectations or subverting them. And
Hmm.
that's why a book may feel flat, is if they didn't really establish it well in the beginning. I thought
Yep.
that was
Absolutely.
cool piece of advice.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. And again, I when agenting, they put so much pressure on the beginning of the book because you only get to send in the first 5 pages. So I've spent so much time agonizing over my first chapter of my book. And that panel really helped me because I was like, you know what? I am doing these things and like getting some of that confidence of, yes, I'm getting rejection after rejection, but that's normal. My writing is there, my story is there, like have confidence in myself because that's something that, I mean, as we go through the submission process, just they chip away at your confidence in your story. So that panel really helped give me some confidence back, which was nice.
Yeah, that is really nice because there are panels you go to that kind of shatter your confidence.
Hmm.
That imposter syndrome hits hard. It's like, well, I don't have a friend who has an agent that they could refer me to, or oh, I didn't get and somebody saw my work when I was in grad school and now I'm a public
Yeah.
speaker and all these things that make you feel like I'm wrong. I've missed my shot. But
Yes.
I think there's so many panels at AWP to show you that no, there's so many people of
Hmm.
completely different journeys and have still ended up in a way that, we see as
Yeah.
success.
Yeah. One of the panels that I went to was Paths to Publishing 101. And I found that panel so helpful because they went through all of the different paths to publishing, how to do each one, and what the benefits and deficits are of each one.
Hmm.
But one of the pieces of advice they said was the best way to figure out which path is going to be best for you is to first figure out your patience level. If you wrote this book and you just want it out there, there is nothing wrong with self-publishing, and this is how you do it.
Hmm.
If really have that patience for traditional publishing, that it's going to be 4 to 6 years from the time you finish that final draft until, I mean, not even start the book, finish the final draft
Hmm.
to possibly get it in a bookstore, that 4 to 6 years. And I really liked that idea of figure out your patience level
Hmm.
because they just said, they were like, there's no wrong way to do it. It depends on what you want for your journey. Um, and, there was one person up there who talked about like this book. I really wanted to hold on to it and do the traditional publishing and blah, 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 and whatever else. And she's like, but this book over here, I just wanted it out. I just wanted to share it. I didn't care. Like I wrote it. I felt confident in it. I was ready to share it with the world. And so I really liked that piece of advice.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to something that we talk about on here a lot is there are so many different paths and so many different ways, and you need to define for yourself what success looks like, what you want for your writing,
Hmm.
because there's so many different paths for it to it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Um, okay. Sorry, I'm looking for other pieces of advice.
Oh, this is a little bit of a
Mm.
sidebar, but
Hmm.
I wrote like a note to myself that said, apparently doing a short story collection and a novel at the same time is a lot. Because they're like, well, I'm doing a novel and a short story collection.
Wow.
And then
Yeah.
everyone was like, oh my God, really? And I'm sitting there like, oh, should I not be doing both of them at the same time?
Oh my God.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, babe. It's a lot. You're doing a lot. Um, so my editing panel that I went to that I loved was called Failing Again, Failing Better. Which I really liked the title of it too. But the very, very first thing that they said is revision is about discovery. It is a way to turn the work around and discover something new. Um, and I really liked that idea because I really enjoy the revision phase. You're not working with a blank page. You're not trying to come up with the plot, since that's so much of drafting for me is coming up with it as I go. So I love the revision process. And I really liked that idea of it is about discovery. Um, it says refining the message to figure out what the instinctive writing was trying to say. And I love that idea of the drafting is that instinctive writing, and then the revision is piecing it apart, being like, okay, now what was this actually going after? What was the message I was actually trying to relate here? That same panel is the one where somebody said that revision is a lot like birthing a child. You don't want to know exactly how it's done so that you have the strength to do it again.
it's really
Yeah,
funny.
that one made me laugh.
My editing
Yeah.
panel I went to, there was the moderator was Russian, and she said, and I'm not going to do a Russian accent. I can't.
Yeah.
But just imagine this in a thick Russian accent. She said that
Hmm.
a novel is like a marriage, and some marriages end in divorce. And I thought, I thought that was pretty funny. But like, she's talking about like you can go to as much counseling as you want, but sometimes it's just not gonna
Hmm.
work. But she was also talking
Hmm.
about how you can save those parts that doesn't no, there is no wasted writing. So you can take those parts and like maybe that
Yep.
character's not working in this book, but maybe you can bring that
Hmm.
character over here because that's what she was talking about. She had like this whole character in a book and her agent was saying, I don't think you need this character. So she cut that character and then took that and added that character with another character that was kind of boring on their own in another novel and ended up
Hmm.
creating that into a novel. So it's not, she didn't
Mm.
just cut it, she took that and put it somewhere else. So it's
Hmm.
like that marriage didn't work. So it split those two apart and then they got
Hmm.
remarried and lived happily ever after.
I love that because that goes back to the thing that I was saying about the sandbox of like put everything in a sandbox. And I like that idea of like, it didn't work here, but I'm going to put you in the sandbox and then wait to see who you play with best.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to during the short story talk, they talked about something that I thought could be useful when writing a novel during the drafting process was
Hmm.
to create islands and then find a way to like link them together. So don't
Ooh.
worry about, especially like I think with a short story, it's probably easier. Like you don't have to worry about what order you write a scene in. Like
Hmm.
just write that scene and then you can find ways
Hmm.
to blend them together. And I think when you're having writer's block and you have trouble,
Hmm.
just write the next thing. I think there's
Hmm.
a famous author who says that write the next thing you know. But I
Yeah.
just do that. Just write the scenes. There's no rules. You don't have to write it in chronological order. I think about movies. Most of the
Yeah.
movies that you see, they don't film any of those scenes in order. So you
Nope.
don't have to write them.
Well, but the script is already written.
The script is already written. That is true, but they don't
Yeah.
film scenes in order. And I think, there's you make the rules, and there is a bit of
Hmm.
directing that you're doing when you're crafting a
Yeah.
novel that I think, because a script isn't like the full art. The art is
Yes. Yeah.
collaborative with directors and actors.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're putting down the bones of it, probably
Hmm.
even more than that.
Yeah.
But with a novel, you're the one that's doing most of the work, and
Yes.
so you can define what that work looks like to you.
Yeah. While we're in this phase of talking about different pieces of advice that we got, do we also want to talk about some of the definitions that we were given? Because I'm looking through my notes, and between the different ways to publish that kind of defined each of the different paths to publication, and then the understanding the manuscript wish list panel defines different genres of literature. Do we want to talk about any of that? Do you think that's useful?
Sure. I thought that was very useful to have definitions of genre in particular, because I know that's something a lot of
Mhm.
people struggle with.
Yeah. And I know that you were there too, so please chip in with any additional notes because sometimes your notes are a little clearer than mine. And the understanding a manuscript wish list, the agents define some different terms for different genres of writing that they might ask for in their wish list. So the first one, fiction breaks down into several different types from commercial to lit or literature. So they defined lit fic or literary fiction to voice driven over plot driven. It's craft on a sentence level. It can be a little bit more abstract, but it's likely to win awards. So it's kind of that, highbrow, whatever kind of thing. Um, then we had upmarket fiction, which they also called book club fiction, which is in the middle of that spectrum from literary to commercial. And this one was interesting because it said it was a commercial idea with a literary execution. And they actually mentioned an author, Claire Lombardo, who's one of my comp titles
Mhm.
in my manuscript. So that's really helpful for me because I have been marketing my book as literary fiction, and I think that it's probably closer to upmarket or book club fiction, which is good to know. And then they had commercial fiction, which is plot driven. Think about procedurals or romance. The characters are good, but there's less of the interiority of them. Um, is what I had for those. And then they went further into like the different genres after that. So then they had speculative fiction, which is anything that's not realistic, like magical realism. So we're based in our world, but something's a little bit off. Then they have grounded fantasy, which is similar to our world, but again, a little bit different. I didn't take notes on any of the like higher genres of like sci-fi or high fantasy because that's not what I write, so I didn't take notes on any of that. But they did break down each of those categories as well, which was cool.
Well, they didn't talk about sci-fi at all. They only talked
Oh,
about fantasy. Um,
weird.
yeah. But anyway, so speculative fiction is like an umbrella for fantasy, sci-fi, any kind of
Hmm.
genre fiction. And fantasy was under it, and they kind of broke up the kind of popular fantasy subgenres like urban, high
Hmm.
fantasy, romantasy, and portal
Right.
fantasy.
Hmm.
But I didn't really go too much into sci-fi, which I would have liked since it took me a long time
Hmm.
to realize that my book fell into a category called space opera. And
Yes.
that was something I didn't really even know what that was. But then when I was
Hmm.
reading, I'm like, all of these books that I love and would say are similar to what I would like to write are
Yeah.
considered space opera. But I did like going into the specificity of the fantasy genre. I thought that was really
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah. Well, if we're lucky enough to ever interview an agent, we'll maybe ask them about some of those.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, yeah, and then they talked about genre blending,
Mhm.
which is to take two very clear categories and blend it into one story, which I thought was interesting because the ones that they mentioned were a horror romance or a fantasy noir, which sound like they don't go together at all. But once you hear it, you're like, oh, no, that makes total sense. Like I absolutely could see those two genres going together in different ways.
Mhm.
Um, so it was nice to have them break down those terms because it helped me understand how to better market my book as well.
Yeah, I also liked the call to about because we were just talking about subgenres of fantasy, but the agents were talking about you don't need to know what your subgenre is. And because subgenres are
Mm-hmm.
constantly changing, romantasy has always exist,
Yep.
but it's very recently become dubbed romantasy because of its popularity. So, for instance,
Mm.
for me, I don't have to put I'm writing a space opera. I could just put sci-fi. Like
Yep.
if there's still doubt in my mind about what I was writing, or if maybe there's another niche
Mm-hmm.
genre, or if I just wanted to be careful, I could just say sci-fi, and that would be enough because that's the agent's job is to find that specific current subgenre that would be most compatible with the
Yes.
type of book you're writing.
Yeah, I did really like that piece of advice of like, give information, but you don't have to give everything away because that's also part of the agent's job. So, like, they talked about, like, you have to find comp titles, but they don't have to be like the absolute most perfect comp titles because when we market to publishers, we might find new comp titles. Um,
Yes, I also like that they defined when we say we want comp titles, we want comparative titles. So we want a book
yes.
doesn't necessarily, like you said, have to be like it. Like it could be like it has the vibes of this book, but the
Hmm.
structure of this book. And don't worry about books that are necessarily showing how much money your book's going to make because I know they tell you that like
Yep.
oh you got to think about how
Hmm.
you sell it because it's about how much money that book made they're going to compare it to that that's the agent's
Yep.
job is to find the competitive
Hmm.
titles to try and sell it to a publisher you're trying to sell them a story so
Exactly. Like
comparative
in my query letter, my two comp titles that I use, because you're supposed to use ones that have been in the last like 3 to 5 years, and whatever else. And it really is, you're just trying to base it on vibes. It doesn't have to be this book is exactly like my book, because then why would they read your book? It already exists. So I think mine is something along the lines of it has the like generational storytelling aspect of Anne Patchett's Tom Lake combined with the deeply flawed characters of Claire Lombardo's Same as It Ever Was.
Mhm.
And so it's picking out aspects of a specific book by a specific author, not just saying, yeah, my writing is kind of like Claire Lombardo's. Like it's like similar to that. Like it is talking about a specific aspect, but it's not saying it's the exact same as this book. So comp titles, I think, are something that are always really tricky. And I thought that panel gave some really good advice on them. That's all of my notes from my panels. Do you have any other advice you want to share?
oh yeah I wanted to call out this little note of like since I'm not currently using social media at all
Hmm.
Um, that's something that always comes to mind. Like, is social media important? And they said no, because just because you have a lot of views doesn't equate to readers. So,
Yes.
I think that's a good message out there for people who are worried about their follower count.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily matter.
Well, and the thing that I found really helpful is they said, we need to be able to find you. You need to
Yes,
exist on the internet, but you don't have to have a huge presence, a huge following. So for me, that was just putting my author website together. So that
same.
when you Google my name, there's something that comes up, um, that shows I'm taking this
Seriously.
seriously.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't matter if I don't have, a million followers. Um, our podcast is fine with our 15. We don't need any more. No, but really, please like and share us and subscribe and all the rest of it.
We're just so happy you're here, honestly.
We are. Yeah. Um, so if you don't have any other advice, the last thing I want to talk about is the book fair, which is the other really
Oh my
huge
gosh.
part of AWP.
So huge, so much, so overwhelming.
Hmm.
Oh my God.
I walked the entire thing up and down every row for our Instagram, and I walked fast. It took me a full 15 minutes to walk from one end to the other end. It was crazy.
That's wild. It's
Hmm.
overwhelming. I like even like trying to remember it is giving me a bit of anxiety just because it's so much.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, it was nice since I was really kind of network minded for this AWP. I did stop at a couple tables and, we talked to the Florida Review from UCF, and made a couple connections there. We stopped at the UNC tent. So, we got some connections there. But then we also just like random presses, like people who just look really nice. I'm going to give a shout out to Silly Goose Press. They had some of the cutest little like stickers. and bookmarks and stuff, you know? And some people just have really cute merch that draws you in. I got a tarot reading from one of the tables, which was fun. You got a little robot from one of the
Oh my
sci-fi
gosh.
ones called Passages North.
I
This is
love
their little robot sticker.
I love my little robot. I don't have him. He's on my car keys, but he's so cute.
hmm but that's, I think, so my thing is I find the book fair really overwhelming because everybody's sitting at their table, like waiting to talk to you. It feels like being in a car sales parking lot. It's
Yeah.
really scary. But there were like every time I actually stopped to talk to anybody, they're all just writers and they're so nice and like just want to talk about silly, goofy things. And some people push and some people try to sell you on stuff. But for the most part, like they're just really nice.
Yeah, they're really nice. I think that's my problem though, is because like they'll be doing something and I'm just not interested because it's like, oh, we published
hmm
nonfiction. That's great. That's wonderful. I don't write nonfiction, and now I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm always very cautious about which booths I approach, because I either like want something, like I want a sticker that they have, or there were some people that I approached just to be like, I approached yes, thank you, Carolina Coastal. I approached them and I was like, oh my gosh, like Jason Ockert works there, and they were like, yeah, he's great, and I was like, he is, and then that was it, and we just went about our days, you
You
know.
know, that's fine. That's totally fine and valid. Yeah.
But I always find the book fair really overwhelming, and I also never buy any books.
I don't either. I spent all my money on the ticket to AWP and the plane ride and the hotel.
But some people like bring a separate suitcase for books, and
Good for them. Could never be
I
me.
never do. I feel really bad about it, but I just don't. Well, and I'm so picky about the books that I do spend money on that the pressure of standing there reading the book jacket and then, flipping through and seeing if I like it or not, blah, 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 while the person is standing there trying to pitch you their stuff, it's just too much pressure.
It's too much. Yeah.
All right. Any other notes on AWP 2025?
No, I don't think so. It was a good time. I'm glad we went. It was tiring.
Yeah, very tiring. And I do want to say, we split the hotel room. We went to a lot of panels together. We had lunch and dinner together every day, and we did great. Both of us were so anxious that we were going to make the other person hate us. And I think that we're closer friends than ever.
I think so too.
Okay, I didn't annoy you.
No.
Are you sure? Oh, I do just want to share this one story of the two of us being together. So, I am a bit more of a morning person than Maddie is because I don't drink coffee. I have tea. So, Maddie made it very clear to me in the beginning, I need my coffee. Like, I love you. I'll do whatever you need me to do, but I have to have coffee first. And I was like, okay, yeah, 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 sounds good, sounds good. Well, of course, I had a very difficult time keeping my promise on that and wanted Maddie to do shit before she had her coffee. And at one point, we were in line at Starbucks, and I jokingly said to you, oh my gosh, Maddie, you're exhausting. And you went, me? I'm the exhausting one? In
Too
that moment
much love.
made me love you so much more than ever before. It really did. It made me love you because it made me solidify of like, oh, if Maddie was annoyed with me, she'd be able to tell me. Like, this is not a delicate friendship. This is a true friendship. It was so fucking funny.
Well, it was just so funny because it's like I told you. Like I don't think I'm a jerk when I don't have coffee. I'm just not really there.
No.
I'm like a space cadet.
hmm
Um, so I was just like I am so tired already, and like you made me get up and do a video. I didn't expect that, and I hadn't even had my coffee yet. And then you said that I was exhausted, and I was like, "Bitch, me? I just
It
want
was
a
so
coffee."
good. I
And it was such a
literally,
long one.
I immediately told my mom, immediately told Michael, and I was like, oh my God, Maddie said the funniest thing to me. I loved it. It was great.
I didn't even remember that. I didn't even remember that.
Oh my God. It's one of my favorite things that happened the whole time that we were gone. It was so
Yeah.
funny.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
All right. Well, we'll see if we do it again next year, but if not next year, we're definitely going to do it again in the future. We'll just,
totally.
see financially if we can do it every year or maybe every other. I'm Abigail.
And I'm Maddie, and this has been
Two writers.
Many Wrongs.